Hi everyone, my name is Elizabeth Betty Bonsu. I am the founder and the president of Tedmed Engineering and Projects, popularly known as TMEPS. I am also the founder of Divinity Clinical Research Site. I'm here with my site director. We're going to learn everything about clinical research, GCP training, and I decided to record this and post it on YouTube and all the various websites because I think there are people out there that can benefit from this. One of the things that we have in this industry is there's not enough videos out there for people to learn, for new people that want to be either a site owner or a CRA, which is Clinical Research Associate, CRC, Clinical Research Coordinator, the list goes on. Regulatory specialist. There's so many areas in clinical research that you can learn from. Luckily for you and for us, I've been in the industry for 16 years. This is the main reason why I formed both companies. Tedmed Engineering and Projects is not just for clinical research, but also really deal with medical device as well, engineering, servicing, all that. But anyway, I'm going to stop advertising ourselves and I'm going to jump right into it. So what I want to talk about today is the various agencies. I'm going to start out from the various agencies that you have to deal with when you are in clinical research. So let's start from there. First agency that I will talk about, FDA, Food and Drug Administration. Let me cut it short. Administration. I was gonna cut it short, but hey, maybe someone doesn't know what FDA is. IRB, also known as IEC, Institutional Review Board. They are called IRB in the US. In other countries, they call them IEC. It's the same agency. Their IEC means Institutional Ethics Committee. And then the third agency that you don't really have to deal with a lot, they give accreditation to IRB is OHRSP, Office of Human Research Protection. Another industry or another agency you hear about is HHS. Some say DHHS, but it's Department of Health and Human Services. And lastly, another important agency, number 5, is ICH, International Council or Conference, same thing, of Harmonization. So these are the various agencies. There are more. We'll discuss it. But for now, for a new person that is starting in this field, this seems like, okay, this is a lot of agencies. They're not that complicated once you break it down. And let me put up here, sponsor. All right. Drop this down. Try to write this down if you're not familiarized with the various agencies. We're going to talk more about it. Again, I'm here with my site director and others that are taking notes. So I'm going to wait for a second and we're going to keep moving. Keep moving. All right. So who is FDA? FDA, as I said, the Food and Drug Administration. They are a regulatory agency, and we're going to explain that. Regulatory agency. IRB, or Institutional Review Board, or Institutional Ethic Committee, is exactly what this says. It's an ethic committee for human research. OHRSP, Office of Human Research Protection, they give accreditation to IRB in order for them to operate. What does that mean? It means that I can't just wake up today and say I'm creating an IRB agency and that's what it is. No. They have to go through OHRSP in order for them to get certified as an RIB. And so that is really the process, and that regulation goes under what we call CFR, Code of Federal Regulation, and there are various Code of Federal Regulation available that really gives the roadmap on what to do and what not to do. HHS, Department of Health and Human Service, they accredit this organization. So they give accreditation to this organization, OHRSP. And ICH are just basically a conference or a council of committee that was created to safeguard the right of human subjects. So they created a list of standards called GCP, Good Clinical Research, Good Clinical Practices, that is more like a regulation or a list of practices that needs to be observed when you are doing a clinical research involving human subject. And we are going to talk about why that is even important. So we're going to, as we move on, it's going to make sense. The various agencies, there are more agencies out there. But for now, if I was to create this in a simple form, this is what I would say. This is FDA, as I said, regulatory. Then we have IRB or IEC, Ethic Committee. And they are accredited by OHRPS, Office of Human Research Protection Service. And they are accredited by HHS, Department of Health and Human Services. Right? Under HHS, if you want to break it down, there are so many agencies that fall under HHS. One of them is NIH. And the famous one, CDC, Center. As you all know, everybody knows CDC. So they fall under HS. So in essence, you would say that there is FDA, who are regulatory, and then there is HHS, who accredits RIB, who accredits H is getting confusing. OHRPS, and they accredit IRB. And then HHS accredit IRB. So if I was gonna simplify this, and I'm trying to make it this very simple, because it gets confusing as it goes on. But honestly, when we keep going, it will become easier. So forget about FDA. We already talked about that. Food and Drug Administration Regulatory Agency. So think about HHS, Health and Human Services. They accredit OHRPS, Office of Health Research Protection Services, and then they accredit IRB and IEC. I think this is as simple as I can make this. And there's so many agencies involved in this. NIH, CDC, the list goes on. Most NIH provide funding. So basically they sponsor research. They provide money for research. And of course, you know, CDC does the same thing. So this is the simplified form. And then when we say ICH, International Council or Conference of Harmonization, they created standards to follow for human research. Called GCP, Good Clinical Practices. So this is the breakdown, if it makes sense. One of the things I'll tell you about this industry is don't try to remember everything at once. There's no way, no matter how smart your brain is, there is no way you can remember everything. So the goal about really learning this industry is definitely years of experience. I can stand in front of you because of the years of experience I've been in this field, but even I still learn. Every day you learn something new. So the more you hear the information, the more you read on it. You have to devote a lot of your time being in this industry and studying as much as you can, because things changes. Rules changes, the standards are added on. For instance, ICH in 2016, they renewed their GCP standard in 2016, where they will talk about what they did. They made the sponsors more responsible for clinical trial conduct. We'll talk about it as we keep going. Don't be anxious to know everything about this field. Take it a day at a time, and you get there. The more you devote, it's really being consistent, being committed, and reading gets you there. All right, so let's talk about why all these agencies exist to begin with. The first code we're going to talk about is the Nuremberg Code. Nuremberg Code of 1947. And if you ask me, what is that about? Okay. During the Second World War, before and after, the Nazis, the business of Nazis, decided to do clinical trials without seeking the consent of the subjects, the people that were enrolled as volunteers for the clinical research. So they basically did a human clinical research without a consent form, which means they did not allow or give the subjects the right to say whether they want to be part of the clinical research or not. They had no idea what the benefit and the side effects and everything that is in between was concerned. And so the United States military decided to prosecute the physicians that did this. And this was a call between U.S. military and Branded. You don't really have to worry yourself about what it was, but what you need to know for just knowledge purpose is this court case created a verdict, and after the prosecution of these physicians, and there were about 10 codes that came out of it. Now, those codes were established standards that every clinical research is supposed to follow. I'm not going to go into all the 10 codes. You can read this, you can Google this and read it. But one thing I would say to you is some of the things that came out of this 10 code was definitely consent forms, which means that all clinical research subjects need to be given a consent form that they can read, understand, know what the clinical research is about, the benefits they can get from them, the side effect, what could go wrong, everything, before they decide whether they want to be part of clinical research or not. They also have the ability to discuss this, ask questions, and that questions need to be answered before they get themselves involved in clinical research. So that was one of the main things, which, of course, the Nuremberg Code of 1941 establishes. And then there was some of it were benefits of what the clinical research is supposed to be. The benefit needs to outweigh the risk. There has to be done by qualified personnel, which means that for clinical research, a medical person, someone that have a good understanding of medical should be able to be involved in the clinical research, should oversee the clinical research. There's a list of things that it talks about. Read about the code if you're interested. So this was also one of the first things that started the discussion and the standard being created for how clinical research concerning human subjects should be conducted. Did you get that? And we're going to keep going and discuss more about this. So like I said, there was like 10 codes. The second one is the Declaration of Helsinki. 1964. So the Declaration of Helsinki 1964, this was developed. It was developed by the WMA, World Medical Association. And what this did was it basically built on the Nuremberg Code of 1947. It built on it. Now, also, the Declaration of Helsinki of 1964 is considered as the cornerstone document for clinical research concerning human subjects. So it became the ultimate standard document that basically directs how human research, clinical trials involving human research should be. And it builds on, one of the things that it builds on is the vulnerable population. And if you ask me what that means, two things that should come in mind is kids and the mental disabled. So basically, people that can make decisions for themselves. Depending on what mental condition you have, you might or might not be able to make a decision as to, or to even understand what, to be able to sign a consent forms. Because in order for you to sign a consent form, you have to be explained what a clinical research is, the effect, the benefits, the risk, everything. Somebody with a mental health issue that may not be able to have the right or be in the mental state to make that decision, they have to have a legal representative to make that decision for this. And for the kids, if the kids can understand it in a basic level, then there is what we call accent, and the kids can be created like cartoons and pictures and colorful things that would explain, at least for them to have an understanding of what a clinical research is. So the goal was to emphasize on the fact that human subjects involved in clinical trial has to be able to consent. And if they can, someone with kids, it could be the parent, who are of course the legal parents, to be able to make that decision. So that was what Declaration of Helsinki in 1964 became, the cornerstone document that has the standards required for clinical research involving human subjects. We're going to keep going. There is also the Belmont Report, (1979). It's the Belmont Report. Now this incident actually breaks my heart when I think about it. Even till today, anyway, let's get into it. This was a 40-year trial. And it's called the Tuskegee incidents. The Tuskegee incidents. This Belmont Report was written by the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects. Of biomedical and behavioral research. Now, why did they create this? This was a result of an outrageous incident concerning the Tuskegee incident. What happened was 600 male subjects were enrolled in clinical research. Of the 600 male subjects, 399 had syphilis, 201 didn't. None of these individuals were told that they were in clinical research. They were told that they were being treated for bad blood. They were given free food, burial insurance, and medical care. This was all they were given. They were not told that they were in clinical trial. In 1947, when penicillin became available, they did not give it to the 399 male subjects that actually had the sickness. And this affected their family, their kids. I mean, it's still a discussion till today. And so the Belmont Report of 1979 came out of this incident. And it's the worst incident in the history of human research. So this report was created to create a standard. And let me read that for you. So that it basically became to create a standard for IRB approval, and that's why it paved the way for the IRB approval. And as you remember, as we talked about IRB before, they are what? Either IRB or other countries call it IEC, Institutional Review Board, or Institutional Ethics Committee. And the Belmont Report of 1979 paved the way for IRB to start approving what we will discuss later on, which is the protocol of all clinical research. And I will call it basically an itinerary of an entire clinical research. And so that's Belmont Report, and the Tuskegee incident created IRB, brought IRB into the conversation. So as we talked about the agencies and why they even exist, definitely that's how IRB or IEC became a conversation in clinical research. There is a last one called the Common Rule. And it's 1981. And Common Rule created 45 CFR 46. CFR means Code of Federal Regulation. And Code of Federal Regulation was created by the FDA. What Common Rule of 1981 basically says is it outlines or details how the IRB committee should be structured. The members of the IRB or IEC is to be structured. Basically, that means that me and other 5 people that has no idea what we're doing cannot just get up and say we are getting accreditation to have an IRB agency. There are requirements, and the requirement was formed under 45 CFR Code of 46. So Title 41 Code of Federal Regulation 46. Is it essential for you to know this? Yeah, if you're interested, when you Google this code, if you just type in 45 CFR 46, it will pull up what it is for you. And more than likely will bring out, or just type in the Common Rule of 1981, and it will bring it out. And one of the things that, like I said, it mandated the requirement for how IRB and their rosters must be structured and define key terms such as research, human subject, and minimum risk. Now, if this sounds like a lot of agencies, yes, it is. You kind of have to know why clinical research concerning human subject is even essential. Because this kind of gives you a great background of why there are all these rules and standards and regulations. One of the agency or committee that we talked about earlier was ICH. That is International Council. They changed their name recently. They changed their name. Council, you can say council or conference, CC. I just call it CC. But council, either council or conference of harmonization. So International Council, or you can say Conference of Harmonization, ICH. They created a standard, as I said before, GCP, Good Clinical Practices. The best way to understand, when I first started in this industry, the best way for you to understand what this even means, I gave it an initial, because in this industry, there's so many acronyms that you use, so you might as well create your own as time goes on to remember things. This is what I created as an acronym to remember what good clinical practices was, because when I first started 16 years ago, I didn't have everything I needed. So I had to remember what is what. So for a new person that is starting, this is acronym put in your head. It's not really an industry acronym. It's just something I created, and I call it DCPMARAR. Now, if you can remember all this, great. If you can, and you can just remember what it is, that would be good. But just remember, this is not an industry acronym. I created this myself. And what does D mean? D means design. So good clinical practices provide a standard for the design of clinical research. C means the conduct of clinical research. P, performance of clinical research. M, monitoring of clinical research. So let's deal with the first AR. Auditing of clinical research. R means recording of clinical research. Then let's deal with the last AR. This is analyzing or analysis of clinical research. And this is reporting of clinical research. So as you can tell, this is why I created these acronyms. Because when I first started it made it easier. Because if you're not a monitor or a site owner that actually do this on a daily basis, this is not where you're going to remember what good clinical research practices is. But good clinical research practices was really the standard for the design, conduct, performance, monitoring, auditing, recording, analyzing, and reporting of clinical research involving human subject. The design, we're going to break all of this down for you to understand why this matters. So let's talk about the first one. I'm going to clean this. I'm going to rewrite it, but I'm going to at least explain it better. Remember the acronym if it makes it easier for you. DCPMARAR. You know how I used to remember this? When I started in this industry, I was a medical engineer. And I still am in clinical research. But as a biomedical engineer, we do what we call PM, preventive maintenance. So that made this easier for me to remember. DC, I remember it by Washington, DC. ARAR, I just had it in my mind. And it made it easier for me. However you want to understand this or remember this, as a new person in this field, that's up to you. But create something, create your own way. Just remember there are so many acronyms in this industry. But this is not an acronym in this industry, it's just something I created. Let me bring this forward. All right. So let's talk about D, design of clinical research. Involving human subjects. The design of a clinical research basically is there has to be a standard. You cannot just get up and say, I've developed a compound and here we're doing a clinical research without the design. So the design falls under what we call protocol. So every clinical research would have a protocol. Every clinical research will have a protocol, and I'm going to break down all the information that a protocol is going to have, at least the basic of it. rather than going into details, let's just talk about it. There will be the study design, it will have how the protocol will be monitored, how it will be audited. Remember all the PM. So let's do this. Let's use my acronym to explain what the protocol comes with. Definitely the protocol is going to have all the information of how the drug was developed in the lab. Every information, and we'll talk about it, but it's called IB, investigational brochure. We'll talk about it so you don't have to remember it right now. For now, just focus on what the protocol is. The basic way to explain the protocol is an itinerary. Like you're going out of town and you're going to be doing a lot of things, and you have an itinerary of what you're going to do from the beginning to the end. So a protocol is from the beginning to the end of what the entire clinical research is. So one of the informations that it will have will be the investigational brochure, which is all information about the compound that was developed in the lab that even started this whole drug development to begin with. And remember this acronym. It will have the design of the project of the study, right? It will have how the study will be conducted. Remember the acronyms. DCPMARAR. So this is D, this is C, how the study will be conducted. And then we have P, the performance of the study, how the study will be performed. Will be performed. So now we've had our D, we have our C, and we have our P. P is performance. So how the study will be performed. And then let's go to M. The study will be monitored to make sure that the various sites that are working with the human subject are following GCP regulations or GCP standard. And as I said before, GCP standard is this, the acronym I created, DCPMARAR. So how the protocol will have in it how the site will be monitored, the monitoring, and we call it a monitoring plan. There has to be a plan on how this clinical research will be monitored. So just monitoring, and that goes under our M. So now let's deal with the AR. My last acronyms. AR. So AR is how, in the protocol, we show how the study will be audited, how the study will be recorded, how the study will be analyzed after the recording. So after they get the human subjects, after they get all the data and information, how would they analyze it? How every data that is obtained during the clinical research will be analyzed. Because it has to be analyzed, and we're going to go into that. We're going to go into that later. And then how it will be reported. Because everything that is done in the clinical research needs to be reported to the agencies that we discussed. And we're going to break that down. So, two things you have to remember with everything I said. If you can go by the acronyms, DC, Washington, DC, PM, AR. And this are the standard for GCP. Good Clinical Research, that was created by ICH. And then remember what this does. Design, conduct, performance, monitoring, auditing, recording, analyzing, and reporting. It's a lot. That's why the acronym helped me when I first started. All right, so with this in mind, let's move on to talk about what is involved in clinical research and who does the clinical research. And I'll bring this acronym back as we go. We'll talk about the acronyms because it will make up the entire lecture. That anything I will talk to you about in clinical research will fall under those standards. The ICH standard is a guide for all clinical research involving human subjects. So we're going to talk about that. But for now, let's start from the beginning. What really starts a clinical research? How does that person just gets up and say, I'm developing a drug? It starts at the lab in a process called preclinical phase. And it is developed mostly by scientists who are also the sponsors or the people that pays for the entire clinical trial. They might have gotten a funding from NIH, from all the other ways, whichever ways, they are the people that pay for the clinical research. And they develop a compound in the lab. And they test it to see if there's anything that can come out of it. And then when they feel confident enough that they've tested and they think something will come out of it, they start doing testing. There are two types of tests that are done, depending on where that research is going. There are two, in vivo and in vitro diagnostic. And you will get the acronym IVD, right? The only thing you need to know what this is in vivo is using living things as a test subject. And in vitro is just tests done in test tubes. Now, I've been in this industry for 16 years. I know both the difference. I currently work for a cell separation scientific company, and I utilize both my world, my engineering field. So I am a field service engineer, but in clinical research as well. Again, my titles are many because I've been in this industry for so long that I've pretty much done everything. But currently, one of my main jobs involves working with different clinical research sites, and the companies I work for they make cell separation devices and is used to do diagnostic testing in the lab, and that falls under in vitro diagnostic. They do human cell separation, they do all kinds of diagnostic. But those falls under in vitro because it's done in test tubes using reagents and other biologics product. Living thing testing, it's in vivo diagnostic. And more than likely, because 100% of the time, if it's gonna be an in vivo testing, then it's gonna result in human testing, and that is when clinical trials and all the regulations that we just talked about will come into factor. Now, that's for the tests that really don't go anywhere. They still follow what we call good laboratory practices, GLP. We won't go into this since we are really channeling this into clinical research aspect of it. As time goes, I'll make more videos and we'll talk about all the various things. There's also GMP. I'll talk about all of that, but for now, let's just focus on GCP. So all you have to remember is clinical research concerning human trials. It starts with preclinical at the lab, and it involves in vivo. So they test the compound, they develop the compound, they test it and they think this can really become something. So they go on to the next level, which is animal testing. Now, if you remember earlier, I talked about something called investigational brochure. And I talked about how it will have all the information concerning the compound that was developed, every detail of the drug development and everything will be compounded together to create an investigational brochure, including the animal testing and everything. Now, one of the things you need to remember is everything that was done in the preclinical stage is all going to be joined together as one data to be submitted to the FDA. So you can't just say, I've done clinical testing in the lab and I'm ready to go, and boom, we are ready to go. It does not work like that. All of this is going to be put into one big data that will be submitted to the FDA. And so you need to remember that there is no way that you can just develop a compound and then decide that it's ready to go and then jump into clinical research. It doesn't work like that. Now, all the data that is put also has to have what we call CFR 11, and we're going to talk about that later. I'm trying to refer to my notes to make sure that I mention everything that I would love to talk about. So all of this is put into a data, and that data needs to be CFR 11 regulated. Now, for now, I'm not going to talk a lot about CFR regulations because we're going to really get into it when we talk about COA C, and we're going to explain that. But all you need to remember is everything that the scientists do at the lab needs to be attributed to someone. So let's just say scientist A did the first compound testing, or the compound or molecule testing, but let's just say compound testing, right? And then later he was working with scientist B, who added more information to the first testing, right? And then let's say scientist C started the animal testing. Now, what you need to remember is there's not only one scientist doing all of this in the lab. Sometimes there are a group of scientists doing this. Everything that they do is recorded in a laboratory computer system. The company that I work for, and the companies that I work for we have a medical device that does that, where it's CFR 11, we have the CFR 11 software in it. What the CFR 11 for now, the only thing you need to understand is everyone that goes into the system to put information, their name. So remember, scientist A, scientist B, scientist C, this is just an example. So scientist A's name will be recorded in the CFR 11 system when whatever information, the date, his name, his or her name, and when, so time, will need to be documented. So a CFR 11 regulation is basically an FDA regulated code. Remember, every time I say CFR, is Code of Federal Regulation. This is a requirement that the FDA has created in order to have what we call an audit trail. Which means that FDA can show up in the lab and audit you. And when they audit and they go into the system, they have to be able to attribute every single data that was put in the system in the lab. Who did what? Scientist A may have documented the first molecule tested, his name, the date he did this, the time he did this. Every single time anybody goes to the system, their information needs to have an audit trail or an audit log. Same thing. Now, my company, Tedmed Engineering and Projects, again, because I've been in this industry for so long, all of this information I've done. I've been under so many different titles. One of those titles is a validation engineer who can also be known as a computer system engineer. I'm going to make a video about all the other jobs you can have in this field. But a computer system analyst or a computer system or validation engineer needs to create. So a sponsor should have a person that does this. Or you can hire our firm, Tedmed Engineering and Project. We do this for you. We monitor and we validate your system. And why should you know this? When we go down and explain documentation and everything, you know why this is important. Or for now, all you need to know is everyone that touched the system, their information needs to be documented. There has to be an audit trail. Another thing is every scientist or everyone that works in the data needs to have a unique password. So scientist A, B, C. Everyone has their own password. That is how you identify them. So they have to be given a unique password. There has to be two types of people. We have to have the user, which can be 3 or 4 scientists, each with a different password. And then they have to be the administrator. Now, if you hire my firm as the computer system analyst or a validation engineer, what we do is we create an SOP, standard operating procedures, that regulate how things are supposed to be done. We are going to validate if your system actually does do a CFR compliance, if it's CFR compliance. This is very, very important. Data integrity is the number one thing in this field. If your data are not validated, there is no data integrity. You don't have a CFR 11 regulated system. You're going to have a problem when you submit an IND. And we're going to talk about what an IND is. When you submit an IND to FDA, your data, what is telling FDA about your data integrity? So you need to have an SOP, standard operating procedures, that regulate how data are entered, who enters it, and also you have to have what we call risk assessment. Now I'm really going off track here because this is a whole industry that we're going to talk about. You have a risk assessment. There has to be somebody that is really validating your data, but I'm going to leave it as that for now because this is a whole career field that my firm, my company, Tedmed Engineering and Project, we are a regulatory consulting firm. We also involved in clinical research, regulatory submission. We do all of this. So if you're a sponsor and you are not contracted with a CRO or you're contracted with a CRO that does not have someone that does this, call us, reach out to us, Tedmed Engineering and Projects, our website, tedmedengineering.com. This is what we do. We will validate your data to make sure that it's in CFR compliance, or you're going to have issues when you submit IND. We also do submission for sponsors. But anyway, I'm going to continue to talk about what we do with that data. Now, one thing you need to know, preclinical testing depending on what is being tested, can take 3 to 6 years for the testing. Now, once those testing are done, like I said, it's CFR 11 validated. A BIB investigation brochure is being created now, which also means that an animal testing was done to find out the level of toxicity. Why do I say human? Animal. Animal testing was done. And basically what the animal testing was to look for toxicity, mostly formation. So what does that mean in pharmacology? And there's others that falls under this. We're going to talk about it when we talk about phase 1. So basically what we are trying to do with the scientists have developed a compound, they've tested it. They think this can go somewhere. Then they do the animal testing. They're trying to find out, they give the animal a doses of the drugs to see what the effect will be. So they give it a little bit, they give it a dose, nothing happens. Then they give it another dose, they add a dose to it. They keep going to find out at what rate would the drug start creating a side effect. And so that will be pharmacology, will fall under pharmacology. They're going to do that testing, and we're going to explain pharmacology. They're going to do that testing, and they're going to find out what the toxicity rate is. Because FDA needs to know all this information to be able to make a decision whether this drug will have a benefit for it to go into human testing. Now, for a sponsor to be able to convince the FDA that the drug that they've developed in the lab can go to human testing, there are a few things that they have to be able to prove. Definitely the data and the animal testing is going to really make a difference, because the animal testing is a living things testing. Remember when we said in vivo and in vitro, in vivo living things? So after that, they have to prove that, let's just say the drug is for depression. They have to be able to prove that the drug is going to create more benefits than drugs that are already in the market. So if the depression medication is bupropion, right? And they have developed a compound in the lab that they think the benefits it provide will be better than bupropion or any other depression medication out there. They have to convince the FDA. And then they have to convince the FDA that the risk that will be involved, because every drug has a side effect. And they find the side effect from the animal testing and finding out the pharmacology and the toxicity. They'll be able to tell FDA that this is the risk. All of it is going to be a data that's submitted to FDA. This is the risk and this is the benefit. The benefit, remember when we talked about clinical trials and, why it started and everything and consent form, they have to prove that the benefits for that drug outweigh the risk. So every drug you've seen in the market that's been approved has to go through this process. Now, once they've been able to achieve that, they apply for, if you remember me saying that, IND, investigational new drug. IND application has what we call Form 1571, and it's a cover sheet for IND application. Now, this application is submitted to FDA with all the data, the preclinical data we talked about, is submitted to FDA. When this is submitted, and again, as a sponsor, You know this. If you're new, then you might not, but you know this. The regulatory department or the regulatory person or group you work with will really have a big factor on how this process goes, because it takes preclinical takes about 3 to 6 years. It also take about 10 years to develop a drug. And the easiest way of speeding this thing up, if you have regulatory people that know what they're doing. That's what my company does. Tedmed Engineering and Projects are in this industry, knows the do's and the don'ts and everything. We know how to work with FDA, because before you submit an IND, you need a roadmap with FDA. You need to discuss this. You really need to get FDA involved from the beginning to make this process easier for you. Because at the end of the day, you need FDA approval to even do any of these things. So you need even if you don't hire us, you need a regulatory company or department that knows what they're doing. Anyway, so you submit this along with your data to FDA. Some people may or may not know this, but FDA has 30 days to respond. If you don't get a response from FDA after 30 days, do not wait for FDA to start your clinical trials. They can't do anything. They have 30 days to respond. Now, in the 30 days, they can either give the go-ahead for you to go on and do the clinical trial, or ask for more data, ask for questions, whatever. Do not stay there and just keep waiting for FDA. You can start clinical trial. According to the FDA regulation, you can start clinical trial after 30 days. And again, that's something a regulatory person that is experienced in the field will know. All right. All right. So we're going to jump into talking about after IND is submitted and clinical trial starts, what is the next process? I'm going to move from the sponsor a little bit to the site. We own a site, Tedmed Engineering on a site called Divinity, Teams Divinity Research. And I'm going to talk from that angle for someone that if you're looking into starting a site, this is what you have to look at. Now, the sponsors and the sites work together. The people that make the drug and the clinical research site, they work together. The sponsor needs a clinical research site to be able to start their human testing. They can't do the human testing themselves. It has to be done in a clinical research site. Remember, the first phase is preclinical testing in the lab. Then the actual human testing. After the 30 days of IND submission, the IND can get approved. Now, again, after 30 days, if you don't hear from FDA, you can start your clinical trial, but you need to make sure that your IND has been approved, because you cannot start a clinical research trial without FDA approving your IND. So let's just say that FDA, that would not happen. But let's just say FDA really dropped the ball on this one and forgot about the application. It's not going to happen. But you need to make sure, a regulatory person needs to make sure the IND was approved. But you do not wait for the FDA after the 30 days. But you need to have an approved IND to be able to start a clinical trial. There are many phases in clinical trial. There are phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It's usually written like this, phase 1. Let me write it right. So we have phase 1, then we have phase 2, then we have phase 3, then we have phase 4, also known as post-market. We'll discuss this. And then we have open label. we'll discuss this as well. So these are the various phases that are involved in human testing or human subject testing or clinical trials involving human testing. Every phase will have a protocol. Or if it's all phases, the protocol will state, inside the protocol will state what phase of the clinical trials are being conducted. That's all you need to remember for now. So let's go to phase 1. But before phase 1 starts, or whatever phase the sponsor is looking for, because a site can join a clinical trial at any phase. Let's say that phase 1 usually takes about up to 80, sometimes a little more, but 20 to 80 people. So let's just say that was done, and let's say my site, Divinity Research, joined the study at the phase 2. So then that would depend. The phase 2 will be the protocol will say it's phase 2. But let's just say that Divinity Research joined right before the entire research, the phase 1 starts. What will you do at a site level? So all you owners out there, or people that, all of you that wants to start a site, this is the first thing you do. Look for a PI. Who is a PI? They are called principal investigators. You cannot do a test without, you cannot be involved in a clinical trial without a PI. No sponsor is going to work with you. Now, FDA does not say that you need because a PI has to be a doctor, an MD or DO. Now, even though FDA does not say that a PI has to be an MD or a doctor, if you as a clinical owner, if you don't find an MD or DO, no sponsor is going to work with you. Even if the person is a clinical, a registered nurse or whatever, that would be great. A registered nurse would be great for a CRC, a clinical research coordinator. But if you want the sponsors to take you serious, you need a PI, a principal investigator. So that's the first thing. Then what do you do with let's just say you found a PI. What do you do with the PI? The second thing you need from your PI is his CV. Basically his resume, but it's called curriculum vitae, or basically his resume. You need his resume signed by the PI and dated. What do you do with his resume? You need to email this. You need to go to clinical research.gov. By regulation, and I'm going to talk about which CFR that falls under, every clinical research, every sponsor is supposed to register their clinical research here. So if you go to clinicalresearch.org, every clinical research, those that's been completed, pending, moving, on hold, all of that is here. This is where you go to submit your MD or your PI's resume and find sponsors here, people that are conducting the research, and send the CV to them. You have to have a letter, you have to have a marketing strategy on this one, because it is still a business you're running. So let's just say Divinity Research sent a CV, IP CV, and the sponsor answered that. The first thing the sponsor is going to send you is CDA. Others call it NDA. Now, what I'm going to tell you about this whole acronym, I don't like this, because there's also a submission form that is submitted at the end of a clinical trial in order for the drugs to be marketed, which also has the acronym NDA. But that is called sorry guys, my neck. So anyway, CDA is confidentiality disclosure agreement. And for here, for this very purpose, NDA is non-disclosure agreement. But there is also an NDA that is submitted after all clinical research is done and the sponsor now has enough information to submit to FDA and tell FDA, we want to market our device. They submit a form called NDA, New Drug Application. We're going to talk about it when we get there. But for now, you need to know that these two are not the same. This is done even before phase 1 starts, and this is done at the end of all the phases. So those are two different documents, which can get confusing. There's a lot of acronyms in this field. Anyway, so the sponsor will submit an NDA. Okay? You sign the NDA. The NDA, as it says, is a non-disclosure agreement that says that you're going to keep every information about the clinical research or any information that the sponsor shares with you confidential. And you have to sign that and send it to the sponsor. Now, when you sign that and send it to the sponsor, you need to follow up to ask the sponsor for feasibility questionnaire. The feasibility questionnaire is questionnaire about everything about your site. Right? The address of the PI or the site, location, your equipment that you're going to be using for the clinical trial, lab, GCP, certification, your staff. I'm going to do a video and I'm going to break every question in feasibility questionnaire. But for now, one of the things that they ask for in the feasibility questionnaire, which is very important, is your patient recruitment rate. And again, we're going to break down feasibility questionnaire in a different video where I'll just talk about that. I'll create a video where I talk just about Form 172. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So patient recruitment rate is one of the questions they ask. How are you going to be recruiting for patients? Because you cannot have a clinical research site without patients. This is why it's important. This is the reason why it's important to work with a PI that already has his practice. Because they already have a patient database. They already see patients. This is what they do. They also have the lab equipment that is needed. They have the space that you need to conduct a clinical trial. Now, although a PI might have a patient database, you are more than likely also going to be advertising for more patients. It really depends on the protocols, and we're going to talk about it. IC and EC, inclusive criteria and exclusive criteria. Because that matters when you're doing patient screening. We're going to talk about that. But for now, make sure that whatever you say in the feasibility questionnaire, the recruitment patient recruitment rate is the truth. If you lie, I am a senior clinical research monitor, and when I talk about feasibility questionnaire, I'm going to talk to you about everything I would check if I did an SSV, site selection visit. Okay? And that would be, I would not come in until a sponsor has received your answers to the feasibility questionnaire and they've looked at it. And I'm also a clinical research project manager. How do I have both titles? Like I said, I've been in the industry for 16 years. My master's is specialized in project management. And I've been in clinical research as a monitor and different angle of clinical research. So I am both qualified for both. And I have clients that have obtained my services for both. And that's what makes me a dangerous person, because I know this field from a clinical research associate side and from a project management side, and also from a site manager side, because I do own a clinical research side, and from regulatory side, because I do own a regulatory side. And I'm going to break it down when I talk about everything I would check at either a pre-site selection visit. There's so many names. Site qualification visit. There's so many names. There's so many names that is used for this.